Cool. So we should be running right now. I think the video is gonna be coming through. The audio should be coming through, hopefully all in sync. We had some issues last live stream with the syncing issues. But yeah, thanks so much for everyone tuning in. Again, this is a members only live stream, so I don't expect big numbers. Everyone who's tuning in later, feel free to rewatch it. Leave the comments, which are open, to me to see and every other member. Engage in the chat if you have any other thoughts as I go through, because I have quite a bit of material prepared, so don't shy away from that. But I hope this is going to be useful. As with a previous, I guess I don't want to call it workshop, but as with a previous session, I'm going to answer one specific question because every single question from the members is heavy loaded. I'm kind of already scheduling like a backlog of things to cover going forward. And I see a comment from Anne, can we connect on LinkedIn? Sure, just send me an invite. I actually add, I think, every single connection at the moment, so feel free to just drop it. No, don't feel shy about that at all. But yeah, now that I got that out of the way and we warmed up a bit, oh, and Sean is here. On that note, I think this is gonna be most, I guess, useful for Sean, but also everyone else, because this is a hot topic. And it took me years to really develop my toolkit and my thinking. And I hope that, the toolkit, the actual stuff which I'm going to show you is some of the case studies, actual material I worked with the startups before. So at the minimum, my hopes are that you're going to take some of that away as a tinder, basically, to spark some fires in your head. And you can come out, thinking at least, okay, I could maybe do this in my next challenge or next role to be a bit more strategic, or drive a bit of design maturity or design org evolution. But yeah, let me not waffle too much. Let's jump right into it. You can see I have a lot of material to cover, and hopefully I can cover that in around an hour. But, if we overrun, just bear with me, come back to this recording. Feel free to, poke for different bits. We can stop, we can kind of speed up as needed. Anyhow, so the background, as before, again, as you can see, Sean's comment and a question from before, and it's, again, loaded, but it's a good one. And he's saying basically that when you start at a small startup company as a more senior UX person, which is, again, knowing from it before, because Sean has been a long-time member, he's developing as a design leader, as everyone is basically. It's ongoing fight, for a lack of a better term, but you always kind of develop, and you're always encountering the same challenges again and again, but you just become better as you roll with, with the punches. How do you start to introduce more UXR and UX strategies? The new company is still mostly focused on delivering UI design system, outputs, and tactical approach, which is very common, I do agree. The company makes B2B security software for public orgs, schools, hospitals, yada yada, and their actual users are teachers, nurses. If I want to introduce the design thinking or lean methodologies, which I would also say, it could entail a lot of different things. Chances are it's already there. Even the most mature businesses kind of tend to do a bit of that. To this output-focused company, there are so many areas to attack. Really good point. And I'm going to try to help you out in this session as well to give you some ideas. You can start with generative research of that, run design sprints, yada, yada, a lot of different things. So where do you start with an incremental process transformation strategy? And this is a big one. I think this is kind of like a keyword which we can take on further into the session. Rome is not built in one day. Those type of companies still care a lot about immediate small wins and gains. It's a small team with just 2 UX designers. You get my point. Yes. And this is one of the things which I want to preface, with many prefaces, I guess. But UX strategy for startups, especially when you talk about process and transformation and design maturity, is not that different than working with corporates. So myself, I advised and engaged with a lot of startups back in the day. I supported 2 acquisitions during my tenure. In a couple of them, a lot of unsuccessful startups. That's just the nature of it. A lot of success, which are just rolling with actual industry, becoming scale-ups and, things of that nature. But also a lot of corporates, I guess, and seen a lot of big teams and small teams, and the team of one have been as well. Challenges are always the same. It's just that the startup means that you're making bolder decisions and making them quicker. Instead of, let's say, making a decision in a week, you make 4 decisions in a day, because that's the nature of work. But that also is very empowering because you have a lot of autonomy and ownership how design is done. This is very, very important. Sometimes you're going to join big design organizations and you're going to have big leadership panels, and you're going to struggle and start suffocating because to make small changes might require you to do years of development, or at least months, because you have to get not just the business on board, but also design org, and convince the people that, let's say, 500 or so designers would adopt your simple improvement. So another thing to consider. So there's good and bad. Anyhow, just to summarize some of the bits from Sean, we need to introduce more strategic UXR and UX. So meaning, we can kind of introduce maybe different methods than what we're employed today, maybe enhance the engagements. We need to shift from outcomes. We need to shift to outcomes from actual UX perspective, from the UI outputs driven, kind of like a production. Okay, let's just make ton of mockups and then figure out how to be strategic. Now it's kind of like putting on a thinking hat and strategy hat before you go into tactics. We need to be proactive, not reactive to different signals and different noise, which is a big one again. And then we need to improve the design maturity. Sorry for the duplicate, let me just delete that. We need to basically increase the design maturity and also directly contribute to the bottom line, which is very important. The two have to go almost like hand in hand. You cannot just stop the business and say, hey, we're going to come back to you in the 6 months and then help you out with those product designs you need to get out of the way, let's say, or achieve something. It has to come hand in hand, and I hope I'm going to help you with that too in this. And then, of course, Sean, I'm quoting him here, incremental process transformation. So it cannot happen overnight, and it cannot be like a light switch. Now, what I presumed and made a lot of assumptions here, Sean can correct me in the chat. Today, you have basically a few parties involved in that. You have your startup, which has a design organization of sorts, 2 designers. And then you have your users who you engage with, maybe by proxy, maybe to some extent, maybe you user test some bits, or maybe you get the information like through analytics, a lot of different signals you receive in it. Chances are it's not great if you need to strategically improve it. And then, of course, that encapsulates this bigger bubble of B2B customers, which is hospitals, schools, and so forth. So there's a lot of parties involved. Even if it's present just with, a couple of circles, it could be multiples of that. Now, you see, this is where the issue is, because chances are you would want to grow a design organization. You would want to engage better with the users. You would want to kind of grow your own influence and change the startup mentality and ways of working, because they have to become much more user-centered. And of course, you have to then start strategically engaging with the customers, which are not your users. The paying customer here would be hospitals, schools, you name it, basically. So you grow your influence. And ideally, after the years, maybe your startup, doesn't change that much, but your influence within those things change because the methods you employ are just much more powerful. And then Sean immediately in the question says, 2-track system, short-term and long-term. Sort of. It's kind of taking us as a good segue into the principles. And this is another thing which is quite important, is that if you want to be strategic, you have to have a solid foundation of principles. And before I jump into those principles, let me hide it quickly. The reason why you want to have solid principles is because you're always gonna have a short-term need, or like the squeaky wheel to address, basically. And usually the squeakiest of the wheels is gonna get your attention. But if you have solid foundation of the principles, you're gonna be able to step back and say, hold on, or just have a stronger backbone, basically, when stakeholders or your managers or whoever come to you and say, hey, we need to focus on this. You can then push back and say, hold on, we need to reflect what does that mean for a bigger picture, because it can bite us very quick in the end, basically. So that short-term issue is gonna become a long-term issues, basically. And that's not just the communication principle of pushing and pulling. That doesn't have to be said, but principle foundations can make every decision you make, however short-term oriented, much more strategic. So even if, let's say, I don't know, I'm just going to pull something out of a hat, like random. It's probably not going to resonate, but let's say something like product managers come to you and say, hey, we're launching something tomorrow. We need this quick update. Can you do this? Instead of just jumping into it and just making for them, you can then have a chat, reflect what that means. What else do you need? Do you need any signals? Do you need to find out anything? Any evidence needed? You basically become much more strategic with the smallest of the decisions, if that makes sense. And that's what the actual principles stand here for. And the principles, therefore, can scale. So it doesn't mean that you're now working with the startups and they're applicable just to startups or scale-ups. You can apply the same principles and just grow yourself with your toolkit within corporations and your own agency and professional, outgoings. Anyhow, so principle number one, without further ado, is that there is always good strategy and bad strategy. And the reason why I start this on such a high level, instead of saying this is what strategic UX could look like and how you improve the design maturity as well as deliver on time, is because one of the things which I always recommend to anyone, absolutely anyone I advise, and something I live by, is if you want to become more strategic designer, learn strategy. If you want to become much more outcome-focused measure designer, learn how to measure the actual product achievement and business acumen and things of that nature. You basically go back to the source. Instead of you seeking a book on business design, which you may be going to find 2 or 1 or like who knows what, like there's going to be very specific publications. We don't have that many. Go back to the actual source. So if you want to become strategic, you could pick up something like Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, a well-known book, Ultimate Publishing. And before I jump into it, what it means, because there's, you could have 1 or 2 takeaways from a book and you should be happy with that. For the design specifically, what good strategy and bad strategy looks like, it's typically that, what I guess growing design leaders do and not do so well in a way is that they focus just on design. They don't think, how does that affect product strategy? They don't think, how does that affect business strategy? My own personal philosophy is that there is one strategy, and then that business strategy impacts the product strategy, impacts the design strategy, the research strategy, and a lot of other marketing strategy and things of that nature. You ultimately have to come together with one strategic mindset and one vision, and then inform your bits and bobs which you do individually, basically, so that message and that intent and actions are distributed. This is super important. It basically tells you that you shouldn't isolate your design maturity improvements, because we have to go, again, hand in hand with what business needs to achieve. And I'm going to give you a specific example of that, but chances are, just to outline, let's say you work at Tesla and I don't know, Tesla is going to launch some Cybertruck customer experience portals for customers to customize their vehicles, which we deposited, $100 or something back in the day. That's where you would think, as a design leader at Tesla or as a senior at Tesla, oh crap, this is a new product. What do we need to do that? So you've worked with the product strategists and product managers to inform the product strategy and vision for it. But when else you take away into your design strategy and design org development and maturity and say, maybe we need to now evolve the design system into the design operations. Maybe we're going to need to hire a UX researcher. Maybe we're going to need to hire more designers to cover their workload, or strategically shift Joe from project A to this project B and kind of like quickly cover it up. But ultimately, that's how it should be, as a default, ultimately. Don't make a mistake to being strategic on your own or for your own sake. You can do that, of course, and maybe you're isolated today, so therefore your strategy really is going to be how to get back to something which you see on a screen, instead of, again, creating so many different bits and being so strategic with setting a vision for design, but it doesn't resonate or stick with the rest of a business. That's the worst thing you could do, and it's going to frustrate you. It's going to make stakeholders look evil and devil and so forth, and and everything in between, basically. I hope that makes sense. Anyhow, now that I got that out of the way, now the good strategy from the book, by the way, this is not me taking, and of course, credit where credit is due, but the actual infographic outlines it pretty damn well. A good strategy is going to have a diagnosis, it's going to have the policy, and it's going to have some sort of actions. You want all three, and ideally overlapping and ideally feeding through. So diagnosis feeds into policy, policy feeds into actions. Without it, you're going to have something like a mere to-do list if you go for actions. If you're just going to be diagnostical and going to just nag and brag, it's going to be just that. And if you're going to create strategic rule books, you're just going to have it baseless, which doesn't stick. In between those, you're going to be either too tactical and reactive between just diagnosing problems and taking actions. Being too prescriptive or unmotivating, kind of discouraging other people to participate. Again, strategic efforts require a lot of manpower to implement. So if you just create a policy and take actions, it doesn't mean that it's going to stick to some sort of problems. And lastly, it could be too high level and not actionable if you get stuck between being diagnostical enough and then creating rule books, but not taking the action to make it happen. So to be good at strategy, this is your thinking, basically. You need all three to go and get that good, well-balanced strategy. An example of that could be this, for example. I know this is very deep-fried and it's hard to see exactly what it is, but you take the diagnosis, for example, if we take a good strategy, e-commerce is providing great, and let's say a scenario here is brick and mortar stores versus e-commerce, growing commerce sites and behaviors of customers where people choose to shop online instead of going on a high streets to spend their money. Diagnosis would be e-commerce is providing greater value and convenience, causing people to buy less offline. The policy would be to turn the high streets as an alternative into hubs for your community, and then coherent actions would be to rent those unused shops, give the members discounted travel, X, Y, Z. So that becomes your good strategy if, let's say, you're a planner. Bad strategy would be just complaining that high street footfall is falling. Then the policy would be to reinvigorate the high street. Then they start to rent, open fashionable pop-ups, things which people wouldn't care enough in that specific scenario. This is like what majority of the people would do. They would just invest in marketing and bad decisions, and then it wouldn't resonate, and just, it all falls down, basically. So that's basically a quick example of that. I hope that makes sense. And I see a couple of comments in the chat. I was wondering how to bridge these two tracks. I'm going to cover that in a second. And great point, future and forward thinking, proactive, strategic, reactive, tactical. Awesome. I think, if there's nothing else you want me to cover here, I'm going to go to the second principle, basically, which is, again, is going to become like a guidebook, I guess. You can then take it away. But just make sure to take this one away and maybe that one too, as the two things, because everything strategically you do has to come down to those principles, because if you don't have principles, it's way too easy to default to your, reactive self and simple behavioral patterns. Second one is that you need to parallelize. Sorry, my tongue is tying itself. Parallelize. Sorry, design maturity and org development with the day-to-day operations. What that means basically is exactly what Sean called out, that you need to, like, how do you actually do it? And it was a good hypothesis and kind of like a problem he had. It naturally comes. You had an answer, basically, you know exactly what to do. You're gonna need to work hand in hand and carve out the time to do all those different bits. So for example, design maturity needs to develop over time alongside your product or service maturity. What does that mean, really? At any point, doesn't matter where you are in, you know, the product shape up or like whatever your startup or scale up or product management, let's say, or product does in the corporation, you're going to have some sort of phases to go to market. Or maybe you're already in the market, but the new feature is going to need to go through some sort of phases. If you don't think in phases, you should start doing so, because it's going to become much more easier to then set milestones, and then much easier to set the actions and the outcomes you need to achieve, basically. It's almost like the most primitive, basic project management 101. I'm just now unpacking. But basically, it's like that. You know, why project managers were so good back in the day? Because they were the what Jira does today or AHA does today. They were really good at thinking in phases and road mapping things and presenting big ideas visually to kind of say, this is where we can get to, and therefore we need to take these steps in these lanes. It's as simple as that. So your products are going to go through the phases. It could be inception phase, like a discovery. It could be the design phase and then maybe launch phase. Or it could be that you're going to go through the strategic phase, the discovery phase, and then, let's say, product design phase before you launch it. So again, it depends on what challenge you're dealing with and at what point do you encounter that challenge. Because the things just scale. These frameworks simply scale. It depends how big the challenge is. Let's say if you need to, again, add a feature, take this, create the phases, roll of it. If you need to launch a new product, take this. Again, you're still going to go to market somehow. If you need to launch a brand new startup from ground up, again, this applies. So you're going to have some sort of roadmap, even if it's virtual. You don't have to put it on paper, because some people might feel kind of discouraged, especially in startups. But basically, think in phases. It's going to be much more easier to then say, this is what we need to do. And now the other two, and imagine that go-to-market is your business strategy. The product strategy would be to product shape up and maybe find a market fit. The design strategy then would be to increase the design maturity to enable it. Very important. Again, not doing design or development or maturity because internet says so. It has to be meaningful, otherwise it's not going to stick. You're going to get frustrated and probably quit before you make a dent in the universe of that startup, right? So that's why it looks so virtual and dotted on a screen, but ultimately throughout the phases, the product shape up grows and your maturity has to grow as well. Of course, it's going to be waves, and sometimes you're going to need to slow down and maybe think super tactical. Other times you're going to need to think super strategic, but basically you're going to go through these and think about it like that. It's like augmentation and growth throughout the time, just like noted before. That's how you basically think in parallels. And if you don't know what they are, again, why I left the question mark is because then you need to find out. If you joined a business and maybe they're a startup and there is no phases and you don't know what to do, well, you need to then set yourself up and basically act strategic, start creating these phases, start working with people, having conversations, quick ones, obviously not spending months trying to figure it out, but like maybe a session or so, and just kind of putting things down so that everyone's aligned and you can kind of then go away, you know, outline your design maturity plan, outline what the product needs to and how to shape up, how to go to market, what you need to test, what sort of hypothesis you have, what research to do, what design to do, yada, yada, yada. But this tactical stuff you basically come to. But if you start, you kind of need to figure out. And then the third one is once you know that you need to do those things, you basically create your strategic pillars to evolve the UX strategy and the design org. The pillars could be named however you want to. I just gave you a few examples, but let's say design operations development to support that maturity, to support that product shape up, to support that business growth or that business goals could be one. Organization development, meaning adding maybe more specialties, more seniorities, another one. Their well-being is going to be a big one as well, meaning the ceremonies and how do you do things. The product practice and empowering that shape up as well is going to be a big one. So how does the product work with development and the design, and what sort of tools you use, what ceremonies, what ways of working you employ, how do you come together to make it well, like how do you measure your success together, and research practices, and then overall design maturity could be another one. And these pillars then you could kind of take away and say, this is what I need to achieve, from bigger picture perspective. This is how my research practice has to shape up. Maybe it's hiring more, maybe we need different tools, maybe we need, again, new ways of working, maybe there's a strategic call to do something else. And again, every project you take on has to then take some of it. You cannot pause the business. Again, you're not brought there in just to improve the design, chances are. Like, improving the design is just one of the things. The biggest thing is going to be to actually contribute to the bottom line, and then, while doing so, ensure that you're risking less and you're improving what you need to improve to do great work. But it's up to you to prove it. And so you create those kind of buckets of the things and you outline. And I'm going to show you in a minute examples of those, by the way. Just in case you're confused, I'm going to literally bring the actual stuff I presented to some of the businesses back in the day, which I worked on. And that kind of is going to give you a good understanding. I hope so. And do ping something in the chat if that's not clear. Let me just take a sip. All right, I'm back, sorry. Anyhow, and the next principle is really you kind of need to then build on top of your initiatives. Going back to the go-to-market approach and kind of thinking in phases, you're going to start to then say, okay, for research initiative to develop, to contribute to that goal and milestone, I need to put these meatballs and say, in the next, 2 sprints, 5 sprints, maybe a quarter, I'm going to implement these actions to then contribute to that and shape it up. It's super strategic thinking. Only you, by the way, can tell me what we are. I could give you examples of it, but Sean or anyone else watching, you need to reflect basically what those goals are for each of the phases maybe, or for each of the sprints, depends how big or small you want to think about it, and then reflect what that initiative is going to be. In my head, I'm going to, again, give you examples, but when I would join startups, I immediately would know, okay, by phase 2, if we want to achieve this milestone, we need to develop this thing on a design system. We need to maybe hire a UX researcher because research is going to become very taxing. We need to maybe, get more leadership in the design. Maybe we need to improve a product practice and things of that nature. And you kind of then set up those meatballs and create your own virtual roadmap. You can put it in paper, but just be careful who you show it to, because it could be that it's useful for you, but not so much for a product leader or a business leader. It's, again, it's you thinking about it on your own. And I see a question. If output tactical things are the immediate concerns of a company, maybe introduce evaluative UXR is a good way to plant the seed of UXR to get buy-in. I would say that's a good approach, I guess, but it should be one of many things for UXR development. If Sean, today you're gonna say that for design maturity to grow and a product shape up to mature, and us as a designers, let's say we would achieve better business outcomes, we need to invest more in user experience research, then that becomes your pillar, just like I showed before. And the things like under that research practice would be one of those things that, okay, we need to, whatever we're gonna run through evaluative research, and the standards we impose there has to be gold standard. We might need to introduce inclusivity or accessibility tests or something which is calibrated for that. I don't know what it could be. Again, it depends on your industry. Again, nurses and hospitals or teachers could be quite different in that regard, but you kind of then work towards it exactly what those actions would be. But you don't also just jump for the immediate idea. Just list them out basically for that research practice. Be very reflective of what does that entail. And ideally even then think of exactly what the issues are. Again, diagnostically diagnose it. Create those policy lists of what you could be doing, and then outline the actions. It could be personal actions, it could be team actions, it could be, design organizational actions. And that's how you basically would then lead and distribute the ideas. But it has to first and foremost be well thought out by you. You can, again, do it as a team in a workshop, but it has to come from the vision, from like personal leadership ultimately. Someone has to take that plunge or like lead with that message that this is what we're doing, and these are the actions we're going to take. And I hope that makes sense, by the way. And I'm going to show you a few examples so you can kind of reflect if this is it, if that kind of deals it. But you should scale. I might actually leave the link as well to this, but you should kind of go through this and, layer by layer build up your strategy so that you have a good framework in mind. As a simple example here as well, I outline that, let's say, if you have that goal and milestone, which could be in the next, quarter, the business needs to achieve X, and therefore the design needs to improve because of that, you're going to create your own initiative, basically, which could be, let's say, users default. Imagine the diagnosis is that users default to using old and familiar tools instead of adopting new offering, resulting in poor adoption and sales, which is both problem of a business, but also from a user perspective, which you could influence. Guiding policy could be that prioritize onboarding, product experience, and product marketing to highlight the value of the offering, meaning that if users don't see what the product is or what value delivers, they're not going to care about it. How can we do that? Maybe it's marketing, maybe it's onboarding experience. And then coherent actions could be investigate user needs with more generative research. I know it's opposite of evaluative, but perhaps this is just a scenario which that is needed, and representative of different attitudes and behaviors, so you can actually find the signals and the right time and place to highlight those things. And in that case, for that initiative, you as a design leader are going to need to improve research practice, product practice, and chances are also develop your organization in terms of skills, well-being, and that's when I say organization is design, maybe hire up more people, maybe find budget, and try to find budget, talking with your manager or whoever you're directly in touch with to shape it up. But you're basically going to create a strategic outlook that this is what we need to do. Again, it's a lot of, I guess, not a gray zone, but a lot of communication involved to talk and communicate and consider a lot of things. That's what ultimately strategic is. It's not just, again, jumping into immediate ideas or actions you might have as individual. Because rarely the organizations or communities or teams, are tactical. They individually can be tactical, but if you lead the team or you lead this capability or a startup, you kind of have to default to more strategic bits to actually do something well. And lastly, the fifth principle is deciding on the right interventions, which is, I guess, the most tactical of the few. You might know of this North Star framework metrics. You might know of the OKRs, but ultimately nobody, I guess, in design, or rarely anyone in design thinks in these terms where, let's say, they're gonna start with a business metric or a measure to improve. They're gonna contextualize and consider the inputs like the research. They're going to consider the opportunity. They're going to consider how does that impact into OKR, and only then decide on the intervention and say that this is what we're going to do on the design and or the UXR and or things of that nature. And the same kind of workflow applies to your call out about, becoming more evaluative of UXR. Chances are you're coming from somewhere where you know that you're you're able to diagnose that issue there, right? So the inputs are somewhere out there, but I would question if it actually ties into the North Star, which would be product measures, but also business measures, but also if it's the right opportunity, also if it ties into the OKRs from product or development side, and only then realizing if it's, the intervention you need to make and how you're going to make it. Imagine that, let's say, throughout these phasing and go-to-market, where you need to deliver your product and the features, you're also trying to influence the design maturity and how you shape up the design organization, let's say, you are just going to get bogged down and immediately start with the opportunities or immediately start with the OKRs. Like, I would challenge you, but also everyone else, to challenge the business basically and kind of go backwards a bit until you find exactly what the North Star is in order to then kind of set this up. Because nothing is worse than, let's say, the go-to-market strategy from a business side, which, let's say, is not user-centered. Or nothing is worse if, let's say, it started with a wrong North Star metric, which you cannot track or influence from design perspective or product perspective. So it's another thing. It's kind of like you need to be very, very reflective of where you're at and if a start was well. Maybe it wasn't, but then your strategic aim and actions you're going to take strategically is going to maybe be influenced about that. And your, therefore, bucket here is going to be maybe to do with the measure design or something like that. And you're going to create yourself this compartmentalized framework to improve those things, if that makes sense. And one of the last plus principle, there are 5 of them, and you kind of need to go and reflect on these exactly where you're at and what you can do. But the last one is like you must, I know it's softer one too, it's not as technical, but you must position yourself to lead. Again, the quote I overuse in almost every live stream or a lot of videos is that champions behave like champions before they are champions, by Bill Walsh. And it's paraphrased. The actual quote is a bit longer. But ultimately, you need to impose the high standards, primarily for yourself, and then, lead by example, and also ensure that your team, design team or research team also does the same. And so then it can scale from within bottom up as much as, from the up to the bottom from the actual measured perspective. The key to, again, overall success to being strategic is going to be partnership and trust first. So you need to build trust. You, again, cannot be strategic on your own. It doesn't matter how good your plan is for design to evolve. It has to go from somewhere. It has to come from tie-in to better the business, basically. It's super important. It doesn't matter what Google does or some design mature organizations might do. You know it already that different organizations at different sizes, maturity varies. I'm pretty damn sure that there are product lines and departments at Google where design maturity is piss poor. It's just a fact, basically. So they can also become more strategic. So, it really depends where you're going to join, but you are going to need to connect the dots. That's what strategic is going to mean. You're going to need to seek the investment for the design maturity too. Again, it's, you can carve out the time and chip away in a Figma on your design system. But if it doesn't permeate into a front-end development, therefore you need to partner up with engineering leadership, then what's the point? It's just going to be for your own sake and, again, lead to resentment and frustrations and unlikely success for yourself or design capability or a product or a business. And then obsession beats talent. Again, doesn't matter how good you are on a tactical side or your skills are in UX or research or design, doesn't really matter. Like the ones who are really good at being strategic within businesses are the ones who persevere. You basically reflect on everything they have, all the different signals, and then realizing what needs to come first and what needs to come second. And it's up to you. I cannot give you like a blueprint to that. You can prioritize a lot of different things, but the first step is really outlining it and understanding and being very fair to yourself and honestly, candidly listing out all the different things you must do. And again, I'm going to show you an example. Just before we go into examples, some of the things you definitely should take a look is the videos I did back in the day, the live streams of how to get more done as a UX designer, and they come from a lot of those leadership principles. But also, if you search on my channel, vaexperience leadership, there should be at least a few videos which are going to help you out with the mindset, because I'm going to be quite frank, to be strategic, it's all about the mindset shift. It's not about tools, it's not about framework. Again, knowing those things can help you out get into the mindset, because your environment shapes the behaviors and attitudes a bit, but you need to be able to quickly snap your fingers and become a different person before, especially if you need to be both strategic and tactical now. So that's definitely a challenge, and a challenge for a while, until you're going to get to a position where all you do is strategy. But with a design, you're never a step away from being tactical. It's just never, you're always going to need to be able to shift. So start today. I hope this does make sense so far. What I want to do next, really show you a few different bits, but let me take a sip and leave a comment if there's anything which, still is a big question mark. Cool. All right, let's continue. And this is going to be a bit of exclusives, I guess. I had to naturally redact a lot of sensitive bits. Ultimately, none of them infringe on any IP, so it's all good. It's either very general or things which, let's say, wouldn't be identifiable enough. But it's going to act like a good case study for outlining what you could be doing in the strategic efforts, or your kind of like a strategic hat could entail as a skill set. So it's a bit of exclusive. And I have two examples. The first one is a startup which I applied some years ago. It was a head of design role. And this specific, why I'm showing it like so openly, it was a take-home assignment. And I know I'm very against take-home assignments, but it was very on point in terms of what I was supposed to do in the role, which is very important. Majority of the take-home assignments are gonna expect you to be like a task monkey, or basically just churning mock-ups and just show me look and feel, and that's about it. It's not gonna be true UX. And even if they flag it as that, chances are you're gonna need to run under and do very tactical things. But when the things are strategic, and you are looking for a strategic role, if you have a time in the world, go for it. And that's exactly what I did. I knew that I had to, undust my thinking and kind of put some things on paper just for my own benefit. And so I took that take-home assignment. And the kind of brief was very high level, which was basically, what do you want to do with the information, with the things you know so far? And this came after, I think, maybe 3 or 4 hours, like 3 or 4 sessions with the team. So kind of took on a lot of signals. And, as you go through your interviews, I'm going to show you random paper, or I cannot really pull out the actuals, but you should be taking a lot of notes, or taking the notes just after a session. Don't lose the engagement of the people talking to them. But you should kind of create yourself a summary, basically, because by the time you're landing the job or accepting the offer, you should be able to just run with it and, you know, from day one, basically be efficient. I know you're going to have to learn a lot, understand a lot, but ultimately you should at least know enough to do that, to start conversations that are meaningful. And so the actual presentation was very simple. It's basically taking the design at that company from good to great. That's what I labeled basically. And in the summary, I summarized that, you know, we need to, you know, the things I observed, the things I learned so far, and the improvement areas are going to be highlighted in this pack. There's going to be a few different strategic pillars, again, just like I said before, which is going to help us guide the decisions aimed to increase the holistic end-to-end design maturity. And then a 6-month plan with a specific tactics, which are incremental, measured, with released value, and it not just develops the maturity of a design, but also contributes to the rest of the business with what I know so far. So it's a bit going blind, but when I was doing this, I was very much so, you know, upfront and candid that, hey, I'm gonna get a lot of things wrong here. And I know I have all the luxury in the world because of the setting of the interviewing. But ultimately, you know, sometimes when you define the strategies and things of that nature, it's good to just be humble and allow people to contribute, especially when shaping team-based strategies, basically, which is beyond just yourself. And things which, you know, like they gave me basically a few different bits to look at. Basically, you know, their current approach to the project, basically. It was the few different issues what I kind of picked up again, which was the same what Sean picked up as well, was the high output focus, product management and UX joint framework, missing business measures and maybe desired outcomes. So it was, again, way too reactive for them to reflect if they're successful. UX research is very lean and jumping into ideations, and UI bias is throughout. Unclear how the outcomes are tracked or what's next in this case, or like how the prioritization is done. And, you know, and also some of the decisions which were clearly made looked like they were, you know, they're definitely damaging some hearts or breaking hearts for designers, because they're very, very, I guess we sift through a lot of different ideas, and nothing, you know, breaks the heart of a designer more when you kind of come up with thousands of different flashy things, but only one can be implemented. And that's what at fault is, really not being too strategic, but also not kind of like, you know, having the right tools and ways of working with a team. So you end up ideating like flying cars, but all you can make is like this simple, you know, tricycle ultimately. And so the next bit is the background. Again, I outline exactly what the issues are, and this is my diagnosis, by the way. This is what I kind of go through the strategy coming up with, and I diagnose that these are the issues I understand are so far. And if, let's say, you join a business tomorrow, you're going to need to diagnose something as well. So start with the problems and outlining the problems. Then I started the kind of like introducing what, you know, we could be doing. Basically, there are strategic initiatives and goals for a business we could start doing. Like, we could set long-term vision for the business, for the product. We could think about the future state instead of being reactive of what we need to deliver. We can think about 6 to 12-month goals. We could, you know, affect the immediate roadmaps and commitments, basically. So all of that combined. And then elevating design capability. Again, the pillars I was talking to you about and presented before, which is product practice, design operations, design community, and team well-being. The 4 pillars, which I sort of highlighted as an example, is exactly what I used in this case. And rarely we go beyond this, to be honest, when you work with startups or scale-ups. Sean, let's say if you are part of that startup, chances are those are the pillars you would need to improve anyways. So maybe this is something like an example you could take on and maybe work to build upon it. And then the assumptions, I also highlighted that, you know, as is product and design practices, just as much as I know, the industry best practices, and then personal trials and errors throughout the years, which helped me with the strategy setting. And so the actual focus areas, again, those pillars were design operations. So I literally presented saying you need to improve your ways of working and how research and design is done. as part of a product practice. The design community and maturity needs to improve because of X, Y, Z. The team well-being needs to improve because I could sense that the team was disorganized or kind of like felt like they were out of loop. And then product practice, basically outcome-focused ways of working with natural work teams also has to improve. So it created that circle. And this is just surface level. Again, if you diagnose it right, you might get more things. Your pillars could look differently, and that's what you're going to start creating. But thinking in boxes or thinking in maybe buckets in a better term, or thinking in pillars it's very, very, I guess, effective way to structure your thoughts and ideas. And, that's what I started doing. I said, okay, this is what we could be doing. Throughout all those different pillars, we're going to invest in measuring and aligning. Meaning we're going to set clear and shared objectives, not just within the design, but also the product, with engineering leadership, the business leadership. The second one is the ways of working. So it doesn't matter if it's product practice, if it's design operations, design community, or team well-being, we're going to have very solid ways of working, ceremonies and rituals that rock, and better toolkit as well. So all of these, we're going to need to reflect on a better toolkit. And that then forms the strategy a lot, because then you can say, these are the things we could be doing together. As you can see, I color-coded a bit, and this is a big, I guess, cloud of things you could be doing. But I outlined of the things I knew that the startup might be doing not so well, but also not doing at all. And said, this is what we're going to need to do ultimately. And this might seem like a lot, but once you go through it, it's all should make sense, because some of it, research standardization, reusable research and repository work, design system maturity to create living design systems, inclusive and accessible design toolkit, so forth, all form those different tools you would invest anyhow in the startup world. And then that fed into 6-month plan. Basically, I also outlined, just for the sake of it, of like how I would go about doing it day to day, which is basically a loop of, partnerships. To summarize it, I outlined the tactical focus areas, so the strategy wouldn't be just bare, goal setting or kind of like, just pillars for the sake of pillars, and said, these things gonna add value at different stages or in a different capacity. So let's say strategic kickoffs or jobs to be done for that specific organization, super high value. But I also understood that some of them could be very complex to implement. So complexity could be high. And therefore that then gave me this almost like a heat map of saying, okay, super high value, low complexity, let's start with those. And as a design leader, I would be able to evolve those and work on those things as we as the design capabilities, the product capability, gonna need to together shape it basically at some sort of capacity. And of course, adding some very rough timeframes again, because a lot of this was from the surface. But this should kind of make a lot of sense to you, because you then gonna understand that your strategy is going to need to come from somewhere. Again, the color coding persisted here, so you understand that it comes from those things. Again, pillars, then specific goals or principles from the design perspective, and then the actual tactics. It's not just the tactics for a tactic's sake. So Sean, let's say from your comments, one of the items could have been, I don't even know if I have, maybe it's even more tactical of what you see on a screen for a good reason. But imagine that one of the items here is going to be literally, I don't know, you kind of need to be specific on a tactical round, but imagine that it's going to be to raise design maturity for evaluative research, so that accessibility is tracked during the user testing, or that you have more engagement with the users. You would put one of those things somewhere here and roughly outline, this is how you're going to get to it ultimately. So it becomes like a milestone. But it has to come from the product improvement, from the research practice improvement, from those pillars, which, I highlighted, and kind of coming back again and again. It has to be quite meaningful like that. Other things, I'm not sure if there's any other bits here to highlight. I guess it's just outlining exactly, what needs to be, like what the ingredients are. I'm not gonna kind of go for it. I think one of the things for that startup, I was also proposing that to get all of that done, this is from the get-go, by the way, even before I got the offer, I said, okay, this is what needs to be done. This is the policy, and the policy is that. And now the actions are going to be basically also some of that too, because some of them are actions, not just deliverables. The good strategy is also going to involve us shaping up the research practice. So we're going to need to hire up some dedicated user researchers. Again, the product practice is going to have to evolve too. There's going to need to be more product managers, and it might not be up to you to say that, but you can call that out. And then content practice has to become as a self-sufficient thing to support the design, from marketing and branding perspective and so forth. So these are the things I kind of say, and then say, okay, we're going to need to, again, hire up, form research operations, look at the things like business and service design holistically. The product practice is going to have dedicated product and UI designers, design systems specialists, maybe UX engineering, and then content practice, again, branding, UX writers, motion and multimedia to shape the brand. And all of that is because, again, going back to the actual good strategy, bad strategy, you need to have all of these three. You kind of scale it up. Each of these could have different pillars, and you can take your own flavor as a design leader, what's most appropriate with what you know in that market or in that area of source or in that product or business size or type or industry again. But you need to scale it up. This is my approach, let's say, for our startups. And this is what I would do behind the scenes. And yeah, I think that's about it. I don't know what that last slide was about, but I think it was just my high-level leadership principles of creating diverse teams that they're autonomous and empowered, that they're positioned to do their best work. And that's about it. That basically went quite well because it showed the actual company. It was product leadership, I think, design leadership, some operations, that you thought through a lot of different things. You diagnosed the issues, you have a good policy in mind, you have a good actions in mind, and that's what good strategy could look like. But if I would just recommend one thing is, again, start with taking the problems, creating the pillars, outlining some actions, and you are gonna have a better strategy than just jumping into the specific tactical action, if that makes sense. That's one example. Let me just take a quick break. And we're doing pretty well on time. Oh, Sean's comment, learned a lot. That's great to hear. I know it's also might be quite complicated. I'm trying to... Oh, $15 for a coffee. You don't need to, but I truly appreciate. But this might sound like it's quite complicated, but it really isn't. Just don't overthink the detail. As long as, again, you start gradually I'm gonna, keep on repeating a lot of these things, but maybe rewatch even these things, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Try to connect the dots. It's gonna become much more easier the more you do. And the next time you have to create a strategy or do something, you're just gonna be able to quickly pull it up and maybe reuse those assets. Even like here, most of this I had it done before, so I just needed to change colors and change some of those signals together or change some of the pillars and text, and that was pretty damn well. And I can see the ad is coming up in the 20 seconds. So I'm just going to finish off before jumping into the next example, just so we don't lose the trail of thought. But you're going to be able to then be again, what is the definition of learning? The definition of learning is that you get some sort of signals, which could be this live stream, And then for the same problem you're going to encounter in every single position of startups or corporates, you're just going to become much more better. Your behaviors are going to change. And so take as many screenshots as you can from this. I don't know if it's going, says the ad was inserted. Maybe it's just for a replay. Or maybe you're going to see it after a few seconds. Maybe it's going to catch up. But take a lot of this information, take a lot of screenshots, and just use it and abuse it, basically, whatever you need to do to make it happen. But again, to think strategically, you're going to need to reflect. And I think we're good to crack on. Maybe I don't need to waffle anymore or like try to, get more time. Cool. All right. So next one is a quick one, and I think it's going to be quicker because I cannot show much. I tried to keep a lot of those, examples quite generic, and that's because, again, the IP matters, the ideas matter, but you're going to see a lot of parallels with that previous example. And here, just also to note down, it wasn't a deck. This was just a strategic Miro board going through different examples or Figma board, going through different examples with the team, with the business stakeholders, because the team was so small, and us just putting different ideas together, commenting on different things. So it was very, the actual strategy was shaped together with the team. And of course, a lot of it I had to take away and prioritize myself or do some work, kind of reuse a lot of those assets to present so it would make sense for our stakeholders. But it was a team effort ultimately. And it was super early stage startups. The go-to-market strategy had to be defined, the discovery, market fit, all those different beautiful things. Then you still don't have a product, very challenging environment, of course. But there I just simply said the design focus as a strategic element is gonna circle around these 4 principles or buckets or pillars. We're gonna make the product experience practice. We're gonna improve on it. We're gonna focus on UX design maturity because we have 0. We're gonna implement and improve on research practice because there is 0. And we're also gonna invest in design organization development because it's just UX team of 1, basically heading up. And so all of these were kind of then providing us with a frame of like, okay, this is what we could be doing. And of course, I cannot show you the diagnosis or like what was wrong with it, but you can immediately understand that go-to-market strategy wasn't there, the discovery wasn't there. The things like, let's say I had to drive or kind of take people on a journey to create a vision or define the North Star because there were so many ideas and things of that nature. So that kind of formed and fed into this too. But a lot of it happened in parallel. Whilst we were investigating, delivering, discovering, we had to shape these things around it for a longer term. So again, everything has to kind of fit in, not just one thing happens, then another thing happens, and in sequence you kind of go ahead. And this actually, the next slides are quite generic in a way that I use them in a lot of different elements, but in this specific case I kind of love to outline, and it sometimes may be helpful for me when I, let's say, interview for jobs or with clients, to advise or even to talk to other stakeholders within the businesses. I kind of say, UX is so complex, but we're looking at quite distinct, and when I say UX, it's like a very holistic, business design or experience design, however you skin it. There's always going to be like a 3 bands of approach. You might need to do some very strategic work. Let's say if you take this one, and this is specific to user research, ignore that. But ultimately, you're going to have a band for very strategic opportunities where you have 0. It's greenfield. You have to do something. There's going to be something which is much more defined, which is that second one, which is discovery, research, and definition, which is, I guess, for old school UXer or UX generalists, that's where majority of your work is going to be based. And the last one is that super reactive agile product design and development, which a lot of the product designers are going to find themselves today. But it's kind of like evolves like that at different stages. When you have a project or you have a challenge, you're going to land somewhere in these cases, and you're going to need to see what's most appropriate to do based on the, again, business needs and measures. But that's how you can look then at your work, because strategically, you're like mock-ups, mock-ups probably are going to land, or like visual design or wireframing, somewhere in between discovery and agile product design and development. Figma work is probably all going to be in agile product design and development. The research to understand the competitive landscape or service vision or kind of explore a risky hypothesis are all going to be between strategic opportunities and discovery research definition. But why I'm showing this to you is that you need to know where your work is landing. So you know how strategic you have to be, but also how tactical you are or have to be. Because there's nothing more frustrating or nothing more nerve-wracking for every other discipline than working with UXers who approach everything tactical or everything super strategic. So this can help you adjust a little bit that stuff. And why I used that is because it made my life so much easier to tell my stakeholders that, hey, I'm a designer and I'm like, you hired me for a reason. But then you're going to give me a different sized challenges of different risk measures and different uncertainty levels or complexity levels. We are going to need to go through very different tactics to get to the point. If it's super strategic, we are going to go very high level, explore the features, sustainability, a lot of other factors, emerging technologies, ideation, stuff like that, until we arrive at something good. If it's something super small, let's jump into it because the risks are manageable and we can learn from it and reflect on it. And that can, not just box you in within business as a tactician, I guess, for lack of a better term, or, if you do something repetitively, people are just going to think that this is all you do and that's what all you're good for. But if you have different approaches to different challenges, people are going to look at you very differently. And then, you can position yourself as much more strategic. So maybe in a way, this is a guiding principle, maybe for Sean or someone else, which could help you in a different scenario than just defining UX strategy for a startup or scale up or, outlining design maturity. It's maybe much more just like, how do we do design, basically. Hope that makes sense. But anyways, for that startup specifically, we started with a team defining, and again, I wouldn't be able to do this outside a startup, but through the conversations, journey mapping, user interviews, strategic workshops with a business, we outlined exactly what users were going to engage what. And this is all redacted with black because none of it is really sensitive. But, for the sake of it, I don't want to also for you to focus and say, this is what the phase should be. The phase could mean anything. It could be, discovery, design, development, launch. It could be, again, I kind of named it already, but you get my point. You name your phases. It could be that the phase is just pure scientific research because you're working with AI or generative models. And then the next phase is going to be something like beta testing your models or something like that. And the next phase is going to be something like what OpenAI does with their public beta of the open, ChatGPT AI. It could be that. So you work with business to define those phases. They're not your design phases. The design is going to follow underneath in parallel. But those phases then, allowed us to say these users are going to be engaging with our offering at that point. Therefore, our research and design is going to need to be front-loaded in this phase. Or maybe our research and design is going to start in the next phase. And kind of like gives you a rough plan to understand that strategically your research practice, going back to the pillars or product or design or development, has to shape up as well with this plan from the business, so through a customer-centric lens as well at that, which is beautiful. It's a big change. And then let's say you could create your own high-level roadmap, basically, of sorts, where you say this is what we're going to do to define the early I don't know, product of sorts. This is where we're gonna need to do most discovery. This is where we're gonna need to do most product work. This is where we're gonna research a lot throughout it, and let's say it's gonna trail off and so forth, a public presence, you name it. And then you can say, in this specific purple bit, we can make all these different activities. And therefore, we're gonna need to invest, let's say, a lot in some sort of user-centric workshops, problem framing workshops, mixed method research and stuff like that. We're going to get these outputs specifically. And I know this is an example of more general project management, like UX project management, but it also requires a good strategic mindset to come up with this, to create this outlook for yourself, your team, the people you're going to manage eventually or work with ultimately. And these are the outcomes like user definition, future vision, things of that nature, which is going to contribute to that early, let's say, phase of the things. And that then, of course, I'm missing a lot of steps and a lot of slides, quote unquote, here, but that then allowed me as a design leader to strategically reflect that for that phase, crap, it's only myself. I need to hire someone in product design to support the product and engineering practice. And I also need to hire probably a UX researcher to support the research practice. And then in next phase, we're going to need some content design help. And in the next phase, we're going to need to have a design operations and maybe form dedicated research ops practice and so forth. And you kind of scale it and budding things and strategically look out. And if I'm making myself clear, you kind of went from those pillars to very specific phasing from the business side, and then created your own roadmap for how design could shape up and how the maturity could shape up. And again, you could go and create your own strategies now of like how specifically maturity is going to increase, but this alone is a bare bones of like a starter basically of what you could be doing, right? And then the hiring plan and so forth. Again, don't want to go too much into details, but you should get the point that, you know, throughout those phases, everything is for a reason, for a purpose. There's, again, diagnosing a problem, outlining a policy of sorts, and then outlining the actions we're going to take to ensure that this strategy is a good strategy and not just, again, random ideas and we're going to stamp strategy on it. And this is snapshots, I know, from a lot of different takes. So you kind of have to think a bit to understand why it was done. I cannot show all of it. It would take hours again, but I hope this is kind of beneficial without giving too much of how, I guess, the strategic deliverables at least could look like. But again, you never deliver strategic deliverables. You might outline it in a presentation of sorts, right? Or like you're going to give it a talk in one of the brown bag lunches or all hands of a startup or the next demo session or something like that. But basically, you know, if you start somewhere, it's much easier to reflect of what you need to do. But start with business, product, design, and keep on rolling, because the loops have to be much more, you know, iterative, bold, and so forth. And you don't really even have to kind of fear being bogged down or taking too much time, because you won't be able to, as long as you apply these frameworks. You're going to make even the smallest of the decisions, which you need to make quick in startup world, quite fast. But yeah, and I see comment from Sean, how do you come back to this process and review and revise when things are not going as planned originally? So again, it depends on a type of beast in a way of what we're talking about, but the more tactical and the more measured the initiative is of what you're trying to do, the easier it is to reflect if you got it or not. Majority of the design org or design maturity improvements is just going to be up to you to measure. I could give you like a very random example. In the bigger design teams I managed, we ran every quarter or so, or like maybe to be fair, every half a year or so, we ran the team canvas exercise. And one of the team canvas exercise activities, which is not originally part of the canvas, but we would run, let's reflect on what that company's design maturity is like. And a lot of the people were distributed in a lot of different product teams and different, silos. It was very kind of like a distributed partnership model. Their take was very different, but it was very good understanding. Did we improve from before or not? And it was very vague and fluffy measure, but it still is one way to measure within the team, within the design community. Now, if you are going to tell me that, let's say you want to measure something in design operations, then that could be time saved. And you kind of need to then set exactly the measures beforehand. If it's team well-being, it could be attrition or like the feedback you get or general mood, morale, things of that nature. The easiest one to track, well, maybe not the easiest, but the most accurate, the most quant out of all of these, not to say that, it's the most important, by far it's not, is a product practice, because this is where you would say, okay, from a business perspective, this is our North Star, which could be, I'm going to be so wrong, Sean, here, but let's say if it's a hospital, I'm going to kind of piggyback on your example previously. A North Star, I don't even know what that could be. Maybe active users, daily active users, or something like. It's probably not, but let's presume it is daily active users, where nurses are going to use your application on their laptops or their station machines every day. That could be your North Star, right? Maybe you are going to need to improve that. This is your business goal. This is a product measure. Therefore, product is going to need to shape up, and maybe the marketing is going to be involved, maybe UX is going to be involved, and this is you universally going to target that. Together, you're going to need to tell yourselves and agree what exactly is the hypothesis for the improvement, meaning jump to the intervention sort of and say, do we redesign it completely or do we need a new feature? What does that look like? How confident are we? What's in scope? What's out of scope? What else do we need to find out and go back to the inputs and define that opportunity? And then again, how does it feed into the ongoing OKRs so that, let's say, okay, today we know that the hypothesis is yes or no for that daily uses and we can improve it or not. We're going to track specific measures in the next 6 months, but how can we measure the OKR sprint in and sprint out? And that's how you define it. So you start with a North Star metric, research, opportunity definition, OKR feeding, and then acting on the intervention. So that's probably the easiest to do if it's super specific. The more high level it is, the harder it is to outline, but also it could give you the license to make very general assessment that tick, our design system is mature enough or not, or tick, we have dovetail, and that's what we need for research repository to look like, and we're going to be happy and do our most work, therefore we can focus on something else. But from design leadership perspective, you need to reflect on it again. If you think in buckets, it's going to be much easier to reflect where you are. So let's say my buckets there, these, right? And that's kind of like, there's going to be much more or maybe different in your case. Again, have a think of what they are. Some of them could be apples and oranges, or they could be like basically parent of a child. Maybe the taxonomy is not right, but who cares? Just brainstorm a bit, outline them up. And then each of these, again, is going to have a lot of goals they are contributing to. And the initiatives in each can be outlined to then feed into the goal. So it's not, again, the worst you can do is just improve UX research practice because of something. Then your strategy is going to end up like this. You remember what I was showing in the beginning, where a bad strategy is to kind of jumping into conclusions. You have maybe a problem hypothesis or diagnosis, that let's say the footfall is falling, or I don't know, let's say the user attrition in the hospital is terrible, and it just, you're losing the users before they start using it regularly. And that's what could be the start, but it's not really good, because you need to reflect exactly of like, is that the right thing? And then, scale it ultimately bit by bit. But I hope that makes a bit of sense. Let's see what's, we just overran a bit for the live stream. I hope this is useful, though. If you have any questions, as per usual, leave them down below. I'm happy to answer, follow up, maybe do another session in the next month or so for the members. Happy to explore other things, but you know, just take it away. I hope this is definitely not an answer, but it's like a building blocks for you to reflect and use it as one of the tools, or like just think a bit differently. It's like, you know, it's very easy to get bogged down in the tactical realm and kind of like not the surface. Therefore, your principles have to be very, very strong for you to be able to pull out and then do some sort of actions which are not going to get you back into the drowning of the tactical realm, and kind of like keep you afloat at a minimum, if that makes sense. Cool. Right. That's about it. Go out there, have fun, do your best work, and I'll see you next time.